They lay the table as if choreography could make everything still. Helen fussed over the napkins until they matched. Mark pretended not to notice and then pretended to notice, the two of them moving in a practiced waltz that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with appearances. Rachel arrived with an air of business, no small talk, just a bag of salad and that look she gives when she's calculating damage control. The roast smelled like Sundays I hadn't been invited to. The china was the good set Agnes had left to Helen and then never quite to anyone else. Too many fingers on too many hands when the estate was divided. Conversation skittered from weather to the neighbor's new fence. From a school fundraiser Mark claimed he would attend to the price of gas, safe things, easy things, topics that sat at the edges and did not touch what we all knew existed in the center of the table like a hot plate covered with a tea towel. Helen kept steering us. If anyone's voice edged toward the hospital, toward names, toward dates, she smiled in that way that smothers a thought. We don't go poking at old wounds, Claire, she said once, like a warning folded into concern. It was an old tactic of hers, change the channel before the picture can come into focus. Nobody likes an interruption, least of all Helen. We stopped. Mark tried to refill the silence with humor. He did it the way men in our family always had, quick, deflecting, as if laughter could staple the cracks shut. We ought to be careful what we dig up. Last time someone unearthed history, the backyard turned into a construction site, he said, and laughed too loud. It landed like a stone. Rachel's jaw tightened. Helen's hand found the stem of her wineglass and held on. I could feel the table tilt. The joke was a buoyed barbed hook, and everyone fished for it like either bait or proof that something untrue would be left alone. I prodded once, a small thing. An offhand question, when did Grandma bring that prayer book home? Was it after she retired from the church? Meant to be neutral, meant to let Agnes be present without letting her be explosive. Helen answered in a way that clung to the hem of a different story. Agnes loved that book, she said, voice soft as wine. She kept it because she said it kept us whole. Kept us whole, Rachel echoed, but the echo was sharp. Her fork paused in the air. She said a lot of things. Some of them were just meant for her, she added with a flatness that stopped any further prodding. The table settled again, but you could feel the thing under the cloth, heat like an animal moving. Helen crossed herself minutely, as if a gesture could redraw a boundary line. We ate. We drank. We rehearsed civility. When dessert came, a lemon tart Rachel had brought because it was neutral and bright, the conversation turned to trivialities, Aunt Eleanor's knitting, Mark's ridiculous fantasy league. I watched them all, cataloging small tells, Mark's fingertip on the rim of his glass, Helen's practiced laugh, Rachel's thinness around the mouth when someone said truth, in any context less than pure. They were doing what families do, protecting an image they had spent a lifetime constructing. I felt like a visitor in the house I'd grown up in, noticing wallpaper and seams and the way the light fell on things they'd worn into pattern. After the dishes were cleared, I offered to put away the leftovers. It was a small service, an excuse to move without having to choose a conversational side. Helen said, be careful with Agnes's things, the words soft and automatic, the way people warn about heirlooms as if they were fragile cups and not stories. I was shelving the Tupperware when my elbow caught a shelf and the old prayer book slid forward. It was heavier than it looked, its cover hammered by 100 thumb-worn blessings. I picked it up, a smell of dust and lavender and something older, Agnes's perfume, maybe, or the house itself. As I set it back, the corner of a folded paper peeked from beneath like a tongue. It was tucked there with the kind of care people use when they want something to survive but not to be seen. My first thought was to leave it. Curiosity has unearned courage, it makes promises for you. My second thought was that some things are hidden on purpose. The third thought, the one that kept nudging like a sore tooth, was that Agnes had always been the keeper. She held things for us because she believed it kept the family whole. What whole meant, tonight, looked more like courted silence than safety. I paused with the prayer book in my hands, the paper's edge pressing a faintness into my palm. Helen's voice floated over from the living room where she was rearranging cushions as if to push any unsteady thought back into softness. It's late, children, she said. Stay for tea. Everyone stirred, arrangements made, goodbyes rehearsed. Rachel stood and straightened her jacket with a posture that said she wouldn't be delayed by sentiment. Mark told another joke, less sharp this time, about the folly of new fences and older secrets, and it got the measured laugh. When I turned the book over to slide the paper back beneath, my fingers brushed the folded edge, and I felt the coolness of paper that had been waiting. I should have left it. I should have returned it to its hiding place like a good daughter. Instead, before I could take another breath, I let the paper slip into the pocket of my coat. It made a sound small as a coin, and for a moment the room hummed against it, full of things unspoken. Then I put the prayer book back on the shelf, straightened the Tupperware, and walked out the door with the paper folded close to my body and a question growing like a bruise. The paper folded into a narrow, careful rectangle felt thinner than it looked, like a used tissue that somehow still held its shape. I had sat through the dinner with one hand under the table, fingers worrying the edge of the prayer book until I could slip it out. Now, in the dim lamplight of my old bedroom where everything smelled faintly of soap and the carpet remembered my knees, I eased the book open and pried the letter free. The handwriting hit me before the words did. Shaky, looping, the kind of slant Agnes used when she was writing a grocery list or a condolence note. The same curl on the lowercase g that used to make me laugh when I was small and trying to copy it. She always wrote as if the pen were slowing down inside her fingers. I had her notes about holidays, recipes for lemon bars, a post-it that said, "Call Dr. Patel," in the same hand. This was the same Agnes, only older, the ink browned, the paper yellowed at the fold like skin. Her name wasn't on it, it was addressed to me. A date sat in the top corner, the numbers leaned toward one another. Decades ago. My grandfather still had the same toothbrush in the medicine cabinet then. The town gossip we were now all too familiar with was a phrase he'd say at parties. Time condensed and expanded in the same breath. The first line was small and horizontal and almost apologetic. "If you find this, we failed you." Saying those words in my head made them different from anything I'd ever heard out loud. They weren't a claim of wrongdoing exactly, not yet. They were an admission of falling short, an old woman's verdict, private and final. I put my thumb on the loop of the Y and felt the groove of the stroke. Who had she failed? Me, first and obvious, but also herself, or the family, or some abstract idea of decency she'd tried and failed to preserve. Beneath that, in the same hesitant hand, came the instruction, "Keep the family whole." Just those 4 words, and I could see Agnes's mouth forming them, the careful, urgent way she would tell you something that could not be said aloud at the dinner table. The phrase had been the salve of our household for as long as I could remember. Keep up appearances. Don't pry. Make the story tidy enough to sit beneath the silver. The rest of the letter didn't read like a confession so much as an argument. Agnes wrote in fragments, as if each sentence cost something. She explained, half excused, that someone had made a choice under duress, that nurses and papers had bent, that a name had been altered, an initial added where there had been none. She wrote that she had been told to fold her silence into the soft places of the house, the Bible, the cedar chest, the false bottom of a drawer, and she had obeyed because she believed that truth would break more than it mended. There was a line describing a hospital room like it was a memory and a wound both. They told us it was a simple mistake. Another where she admitted she had been asked to look away and had looked. That admission sat there, small and hot on the page, the only part of the letter that felt like surrender rather than instruction. No proper explanation of what exactly had been changed. No names. No dates. Agnes had left herself open to failure, maybe because she wanted to be found, maybe because she didn't trust herself to write the rest. She'd signed off with a demand and a plea, "Keep the family whole, and forgive us our way of doing it." I read the letter 3 times before I let myself feel anything beyond the cool paper. The first time I read for the facts, the way a clerk reads a ledger, date, instruction, claim. The second time I read for voice, the tremor that ran through Agnes's sentences when she came to what she couldn't tidy. The third time I read the spaces between the lines, that pregnant place where names, motives, and the small mechanizations of cover-up would sit if she had ever put them there. Images rose unbidden, Helen smoothing her gloves in a doorway, the practice tilt of Mark's jokes to steer a room away from something dangerous, Rachel's hands folded on her lap like a shield. Agnes's letter belonged to a different economy of feeling, one that equated omission with mercy. I had grown up learning omission as a form of love. The thing was, omission had a way of calcifying into lies. The paper smelled faintly of old pages and mothball, that familiar library odor that opens up the past like a wooden box. Holding it, I could almost hear Agnes's voice telling me to put it back, to tuck the sting of knowledge back into the fold. She'd known this note might be discovered. The opening line wasn't a warning so much as an inevitability. "If you find this," she had written, meaning both the person who would one day pry and the person who had already failed to protect something she had promised to guard. For a moment I could imagine carrying Agnes's plea like a hot coal in my hands, doing what she asked because loyalty is easier than upheaval. I could see myself threading the paper back into the prayer book's hollowed spine and returning it to where the family prayers were said, and continuing the small deceits that kept dinners polite and reputations intact. And then I thought of the ways secrets grow teeth. How a scratched-out name on a form, an added middle initial, a guardianship corrected after the fact, to speak in hypotheticals, yes, how those small alterations become the skeleton of a lie that lifts into something that can't hold otherwise. Agnes had written as if she knew the calculus. Truth would hurt, falsehood would calcify. Her logic was maternal, defensive, exhausted. I sat on the edge of my bed and realized that I knew exactly how to obey her. It would be clean and easy and would make me, briefly, the kind of daughter she had always hoped for. I also realized I couldn't, without lying to myself, be that daughter anymore. There was a different kind of duty now, something that felt like wind against a window, persistent and cool, and I didn't know which was the truer fidelity, to her instruction or to the facts she had half revealed. The letter trembled in my hands. I wanted to read further, to find the sentence that tied her fragments into a story. But the last paragraph ended in another of those small, ragged confessions. Agnes had written, in a smaller hand, "If they ever see this, forgive us. We thought we were protecting you. We were wrong." There was one more line beneath it, short and official in a way that made me taste metal. I read it, and the floor seemed to tilt a fraction. "They changed the records." I read it again, slowly, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less dangerous. They did not. The sentence sat like a bruise on the page. I had found the letter. I had failed and been failed, all in the same breath. The question left by her handwriting pressed against the ribs of the oldest part of me: what is a life worth? The tidy piece of a family or the blunt, messy right to know who you are? I didn't have an answer. I only had the letter, the date on its corner, and the sound of my own breath in the room. For the first time since I could remember, a small, resolute part of me wanted to force the thing that had been folded away into the light. I sat cross-legged on the floor I used to build forts on, the one with the nicked varnish from teenage bangs against a guitar case. The letter lay open in my lap like a private map, Agnes's handwriting a thin, shaky river across the page. The lamplight from the bedside table pulled every crease into relief. The paper was the color of tea left too long, and the edges were soft with years. I read the first sentence again because it felt like reading the hinge of something that had been quietly closing behind me my whole life. "If you find this, we failed you," it began, just like that, as if she were folding her shame into the envelope instead of me. Then she wrote about a name scratched out, the addition of a middle initial to tidy a mismatch, a correction filed after the fact, terms that in other hands would have sounded bureaucratic and dull, but on that page they sounded like confession. She admitted that hands and scrubs in a registrar's pen had been guided by promises and threats, and that the registrar had been paid to change a line so no one would have to explain why 2 newborns left the hospital and only one left with the name they were given. My mouth went dry at the image, a clerk in a gray office erasing a truth with a signature, a smudge of ink swallowing a child's name. Agnes wrote, "We were afraid," and the honest little voice under the tremor of the script, my grandmother's, meant something different from Helen's fear of scandal. This was the fear of rupturing what they had spent a lifetime weaving, not the outward polish of the Whitman name but the pattern of holiday dinners, the particular creases of our togetherness. She promised me, in a sentence that felt like a small animal shivering in a hand, that someone would protect me from knowing. There was a practical, protective tenderness in the phrase and a cruelty bundled into it. I had always thought memory was a steady hold. Tonight each line rearranged little rooms in my mind. The pregnancy announcement in the newspaper at the county fair, the photograph of Helen holding me crookedly like I might fall out of the picture, suddenly the tilt of her head, the grief hiding in the smile, read like a footnote. Rachel's protectiveness I had taken for granted as a sibling default. I could see it now angled differently, not just as fury on my behalf but as armor she had been taught to clamp onto, to hold the seams where we were most liable to split. Mark's jokes, always too light, always a hand ready at the small of Helen's back, looked less like levity and more like a practiced way of steering conversation away from anything jagged. Agnes's words were patient and sharp at once. She listed a series of small betrayals, an altered birth record, a guardianship form changed to reflect a different set of parents, an entry labeled, clerical correction, and then she wrote the quietest command of all, keep the family whole. Underneath that she had scrawled in a darker ink, because perhaps she had lifted the pen and pressed harder at the end, the warning that truth could break things in ways no one could fix. We thought we were saving you, she wrote. We thought the damage of knowing would be greater than the damage of letting things be. We were wrong, but we could not undo what had been done without tearing us apart. I traced the letters with my thumb as if the loops and crossings might tell me whether she had been brave or cowardly. The more I read, the more my memories flipped orientation like a drawer rearranged. I could feel the cold hospital tile under my bare feet, a smell of antiseptic and orange juice, though I had no right to that smell. I could hear the rustle of nurses' uniforms at midnight. A lullaby Rachel sang to me once at 3 a.m, one I had thought was a selfless act of sisterhood, now sounded like someone protecting me with vigilance that might have been misdirected. There were humiliations sitting beside the tenderness. Agnes wrote that deals had been struck with an insistence on silence, a nurse's oath traded for a sum of money and a lifetime of quiet, a registrar cajoled into obfuscation, a promise made over coffee that, this will be for the best. At the bottom of the page she wrote, it kept us presentable, as if the word itself were a sort of apology. I thought of my childhood dinners, of my mother steering conversations away from the edges where questions might slip through. I thought of the gap in Rachel's eyes when people asked about our origins, how she would answer too quickly, clamp down. The letter transformed what I had been raised to accept as ordinary into an engineered piece, assembled by decisions I had not agreed to. It made me ask questions about consent and protection that had previously been only academic. Who gets to decide what protection is? Who gets to weigh the costs and hand me the consequences? There was a sentence toward the end that almost knocked the air out of me. Agnes had written that sometimes, in the small hours, she would imagine the truth spilling out like water through a crack and washing away everything she loved. She had seen herself young, reckless and real, wanting to tell me, and she had seen herself older, brittle with the knowledge that truth could take the family and lay it open. So she chose the fracture inside herself over the fracture of them all. My hands were shaking. The temptation to put the letter back exactly where I had found it, to pretend the cord connecting me to my family had not been knotted with lies, was real. Keeping it would mean living in a constructed quiet, letting it go would mean exposing a long, ugly seam and watching people retreat from the light. It was not merely a choice about stories. It was a choice about who I was allowed to be in the world my grandmother had tried to guard. Outside, a car passed and the house shuddered with the low metallic hum of brakes. I could hear Rachel's bedroom door close somewhere down the hallway, the sound familiar and foreign at once. I folded the letter into my palm like a small animal and felt its trembling against my skin. The paper did not tell me which choice would make me truer. It only held the evidence of what had been done. I put the page to my chest and tried to imagine the shape of what came next. The honest part of me wanted the truth aired, however messily. The part that liked dinner tables that didn't hiss would not let go without a fight. I could keep the secret and play along, or I could let the secret loose. Either way, something was about to break. The records office smelled of paper and lemon disinfectant, the kind of antiseptic that pretends order can override a mess. Long metal shelves ran along the windows, fat accordion files crowding each other like people in a pew. I'd come armed with a list, birth certificates, old hospital logs, courthouse wrappers tied with string, and the quiet certainty that Agnes's letter was not a ghost of memory but a map. The clerk at the counter had a nameplate that read registrar and a smile that lived entirely in her mouth. She pushed a tray of forms toward me with careful, practiced calm. "How can I help you, Miss Whitman?" I told her. I tried to keep my voice neutral while my hands trembled around the request slip. Neutrality felt like a protective garment. If I could appear ordinary, maybe the truth would be more ordinary too. She typed, the keys clicking like little verdicts, and then said something I wasn't ready for. "Some of our older files are restricted. Originals require a court order for release." She said it like a rule, not a refusal, like a fact about rainfall. I asked for the birth certificate on file. She slid a photocopy through the slot, standard issue, blue border, the sheriff's seal in the corner. I held it under my thumb as if the paper might melt or speak. Everything looked as it should, my name, my parents' names, the hospital stamped with a year I knew by heart. Then my eyes snagged on the middle initial, an M that didn't belong. It was an M the way an afterthought looks when someone picks up a pen to make sense of a paragraph that had already been written. The ink was a shade darker, the strokes slightly halting, like the person who added it had been uncertain. I had seen Agnes's handwriting in parts, the shaky letters on envelopes, the asthma of the strokes when she wrote in a hurry. This M was not hers. It had been added later, as if someone had decided my life needed an extra letter to be tidy. "Why is there a middle initial?" I asked, and the registrar's smile thinned. "Sometimes corrections are made," she said. "Clerical corrections, amended entries." Her eyes flicked to the window, to her own reflection stretched across the glass. "If the original was found to be in error, we process a correction. It makes the paperwork consistent." "By who?" I tightened my grip on the copy until the paper chewed into my palm. "Depends," she said. "There was an amendment to a registration system many years ago. Corrections are logged, but," she gestured to a line on the photocopy where a whole clause was blacked out with a stamp, redacted. A hand had taken a black marker to a section of typed text and sunk it into a shame-shaped rectangle. The registrar watched me watch it, and then she lowered her voice by half an inch. "We need a court order to pull the unredacted file." I told her about the letter Agnes had hidden, the one I had found in a prayer book. I didn't show it. The idea of handing over that fragile, admitting sheet to a government-laminated tray felt obscene. The registrar's fingers hovered over the keyboard like a bird uncertain whether to land. "There's another piece," I said, because once the sentence had started it didn't want to stop. "Is there any record of a transfer of guardianship? Something filed shortly after." She paused long enough for the overhead lights to hum. That pause was not bureaucratic inertia, it was a person measuring the consequences of language. "There was a transfer," she said finally. "Years ago. It shows up in our wrapper system, court files put away in the civil section. But some of those wrappers indicate a retroactive correction. Our notes use the word corrected in the margin. It was the exact shade of phrasing the letter had used, Agnes's own reluctant lexicon. Keep the family whole. Correct the record. The things Agnes had called failure were not singular confessions, they were administrative verbs. "You mean someone went back and changed the files," I said, hearing the accusation in my own voice. "Sometimes entries are amended to reflect new information," the registrar said, and I could hear her parsing whether she was saying amended or erased. "If there's an allegation of impropriety, usually a judge signs an order. But in this case the paperwork suggests adjustments were made after the fact. I can't release originals without court authorization." There are ways to hide things on paper that look like honesty to anyone skimming the surface. An added initial here, a stamp there, a blacked out line that implies discretion rather than deception. Seeing those small edits in the thin blue photocopy turned the letter from a private confession into a part of a system. You don't tuck a lie into a ledger by accident, you arrange it. She offered me a printout of the docket wrapper instead, yellowed, labeled with a case number, a small penciled note in the corner that read corrected, 04/, with the year smudged. My name in typed type, and beneath it a scrawl in a different ink, transfer of guardianship. The wrapper was not the file, but it smelled like a promise of one. Why would they correct it? I asked because the question needed to be asked aloud. My voice sounded thin in the tiled room. The registrar looked at me as if evaluating whether I was storming in here to make trouble or to mourn. To prevent scandal, she said finally, and the phrase was offered with the flatness of someone repeating office policy. To preserve family reputations. To conform to legal standards. Her eyes were neither cold nor cruel. They were the color of someone who had handled messy histories and folded them into neat envelopes. Keep the family whole, the letter had said. Correct the record, the wrapper implied. I folded the photocopy and the docket printout into my purse with the same mechanical care Agnes must have used when she spoke into paper instead of into air. The registrar returned to her work as if nothing had happened, typing with the same careful clatter. As I left the building, the late light struck the courthouse steps and made them look like the blank faces of ledger pages. I had found more than a blotted line and a questionable initial. I had found an architecture of correction. The letter was not an isolated relic of guilt. It was the hinge that opened a door we had been taught not to pry. I had expected pushback. I had not expected the system to have practiced how to resist me. The registrar's calm had a shape to it now, not bureaucratic indifference but a practiced shield. If records could be rewritten, then the truth could be too. And I had just stepped into a room where somebody had already started. I found her peeling an apple at the counter, the knife working in the same slow, efficient rhythm she'd always used when she needed to keep her hands busy and her voice calm. The kitchen smelled like lemon oil and coffee gone cold. Late afternoon light sent one pale stripe across the vinyl table. I set the stack of printouts down between us like a dare and pushed my chair back a fraction, asking myself which version of Claire would show up, the one who was careful and small, or the one who kept the folded paper in her pocket for hours that morning. Just curiosity, I said before I could talk myself out of it. About family paperwork. You know how there are those old municipal entries that get corrected? I was looking through the registrar's online index and noticed a change. A middle initial added, a name crossed out on a different sheet. Small things. I thought it might be interesting, for the family history. Not to make trouble. Rachel's knife stopped mid-peel. She didn't look at the papers. She looked at me the way she does when she is deciding whether to answer gently or to shut something down completely. For a second she was just a woman in her 30s, a sister, an ally. Then whatever choice she made hardened her jaw. Don't, she said. It came out flat, like a switch. Don't do this, Claire. It's not, I began, and the word feel wrong in my mouth, like defending a small, curious child. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm trying to understand patterns. Sometimes records mean nothing. Sometimes they mean a lot. She set the apple down and the knife on the counter with exaggerated care. Her hands trembled only slightly. She folded her arms the way our mother taught us to fold ours at dinner, neat and unforgiving. You're poking at old wounds, she said. You want to dig because you need answers, she corrected herself, voice getting faster, but answers right now are a luxury we can't afford. You think answers are a luxury? The question surprised me with its sharpness. Rachel, I found a paper trail. It's not even a theory anymore, just anomalies. Isn't it better to know? Better for whom? Her eyes narrowed. For you, maybe. For the story you want to tell yourself about not being the person you've been told you are. But what about Mom? You want to tell Helen, with her heart and her pride and the way she stitches the whole world into being by never letting anyone think badly of us? She laughed then, brittle. You think the past is just a thing to pull out and study. Some things are dead for a reason. I said nothing. I had rehearsed lines about archives and guardianship and the registrar's offhand mention of a retroactive correction, but they were technicalities that sounded weak against the tremor in her voice. I watched her calcify into that protective posture she wore whenever the family's shape was threatened, self-righteous, damaged, immovable. This, she continued, softer and more dangerous, this isn't curiosity. You always loved to open things to see what was inside. But you don't get to take whatever you find and fling it around like confetti. Don't dig up dirt to make yourself feel less small. Don't complicate things for Helen. Don't be the person who breaks us because you want to be right. Her use of us felt like a hand closing on something inside me. I'm not trying to break anything, I said. I'm trying to help yourself feel less wrong. She finished for me. You think you'll fix a life by proving it was misassigned at birth? You think the answer will glue anything back together? She had shifted into that pragmatic, protective mode that always outranked tenderness. Her face was flush with anger now, and the kitchen felt too bright. I reached for the stack of papers without thinking, the small, ordinary gesture of retrieving evidence as if it were a dish to be cleared. "Look at them," I said. "Just look." She snatched them from me with a quickness that startled me, thumb smudging ink. Her eyes skimmed a line and then she tore the sheet in half, more violently than necessary. "You can't have this," she said. "You can't take it to anyone. You can't drag Helen through this because you can't tolerate the idea that something is messy." Messy? The word hung between us and tasted like accusation. "If we don't ask, we keep living inside someone else's tidy lie. If you open that door, there's no closing it," she said, voice low but hard as a lid. "If you bring this out, you will hurt her. You will hurt Dad. You will hurt anyone who thinks the family is a thing you protect by forgetting. If you want to be self-righteous, go be self-righteous somewhere else." She pushed her chair back so fast the legs scraped the floor. Silverware rattled in the drawer, the kettle's hum took on a higher pitch. She swept the torn pages into a neat pile and carried them to the sink as if they were soiled linens. "Don't," she said again, with the weight of a directive. "I'm telling you as your sister, don't be the person who betrays us." The finality of that word, betrays, landed like a slam. She opened the cupboard, grabbed 3 mugs, stacked them as if building a wall, then slammed the door so hard the plates inside clattered. The sound made the house flinch. I watched her shoulders go, heard the back door open and shut with the soft, desperate slam of someone leaving before words could make the leaving worse. When the kitchen settled, the lemon oil seemed sharper, the coffee colder. I stood there with the torn corner of our family between my fingers, the weight of it like paper. In the silence, a realization settled in that felt colder than anything Rachel had said. I was the only one asking. I had kept the letter folded in my coat, I had printed the legal entries, I had texted the registrar. Every question I'd asked had been a small transgression. As if on cue, the apartment telephone, still on the hook in the old wooden cradle, made a single, hollow ping where no one had rung it. The sound read like a countdown. I didn't know then how quickly the word betrayal could travel through rooms. I only knew that asking was no longer just curiosity. It was a decision. And decisions have consequences. I set the letter on the scanner like a relic, smoothing the brittle fold between my fingers as if it might crack. Agnes's handwriting filled the page in the same uneven slant I used to try and mimic in 7th grade, the same tremor at the ends of letters that meant she'd rested too long on the pen. I hesitated at the opening line. "If you find this, we failed you," then fed it into the machine and watched the green light march across the glass like a heartbeat. Maya's name was the first person I thought to send it to. She's the one who reads obituaries like other people read novels, who can find a misfiled census record in an afternoon and make it feel like gossip. I cropped the scan to avoid the margins and the coffee stain that had bled Agnes's signature, then typed a short, careful note. "I found this. I don't know what to do. Can you look up the names and dates? Don't forward." Her reply arrived faster than I expected. On it, "Send me everything you have. Don't panic." And then, almost parenthetical, a gif I had to smile at because it was so totally her: coffee, laptop, a magnifying glass. I felt steadier with her on the other end of a screen. I told her about the added middle initial on my birth certificate, the name scratched out that Grandma had instructed someone to correct, the registrar's offhand mention of a retroactive correction. I sent her photos of the official-looking amendment and the little, looping script Agnes had used to instruct concealment. Maya's questions were precise and calm. Who was present at the hospital? Names. Dates of discharge. Any witnesses? She asked about Aunt Eleanor and the nurse, Ruth, whose name had fluttered in a half-remembered telephone conversation I'd had with Eleanor months ago. She typed with the patience of someone who knows how these things grow. Start with registrar, then county hospital records, then obituaries around that date. "I'll see what I can get from archives and I'll text a friend who used to work at the hospital. Also, Claire, don't send the image to anyone else. Not even Tom." I should have known Tom would be the weak link. He has a phone full of half-formed thoughts and the reflex to share whatever surprises him before silence can settle. An hour after I hit send to Maya, just as I was making tea and trying to breathe around the new, persistent ache of knowing what I knew, my pocket buzzed. "Tom, is this true?" Attached, a screenshot of my scan. My stomach emptied. I had written don't forward. I had told Maya not to forward. My throat filled with the image of that same shaky script replicated on dozens of screens, settling into the palms of people who would not weigh the words so carefully as I had. The text wasn't to me alone, it was to a cousin 2 states away who had a penchant for making drama into an event. I called him. He picked up on the second ring, bright and oblivious. "Saw this from Eleanor," he began. "Don't," I said. "Is this your thing? Is this what Claire found?" He kept calling me Claire as if the distance in name would make it less true. "Tom, please don't forward it. I only send it to Maya because she's helping me look things up." If this goes public. Public? He laughed. It's family. It's fine. Besides, everyone's asking. Did you know Rachel already thinks it's a prank? I told you not to. That's where I stopped, because the rational part of him was already gone, replaced by the small, gleeful impulse to watch the room fill with noise. By the time I hung up, my phone buzzed again. A screenshot of the group chat. Eleanor had posted the image to the Whitman family thread with a short, disbelieving caption, "Is this real?" And the thread had ignited. At first it was curiosity in the warm tones of a family gossip. Who found this? Where did you get it? Is this a joke? But curiosity soured fast. Helen's message arrived with the same sharpness she uses when she pronounces a family name in public. Return the letter to Mama immediately. Do not release anything that will harm us. Rachel's reply was a different animal, protective, furious. How dare you? How long have you been playing detective? You're making this about you when it's about us. There were 3 angry emojis. There were caps-locked accusations about betrayal. And somewhere between a cousins, this has to be fake, and a half-remembered threat. If you know what's good for you, stop. I felt the room tilt beneath my feet. Messages popped up from people I barely spoke to. Share the scan. Who else has it? Did you show this to anyone outside the family? Screenshots of my scan were already being forwarded, annotated, mocked. Someone accused me of forgery. Someone else swore they would call the registrar and have the record sealed. I typed a single message into the group chat, slow and deliberate. I only sent this to Maya. I didn't share it. I asked for help. I will not be coerced into silence. No one answered in the group. But my private thread with Maya filled with bullet points and a calmness that steadied me. I'll start looking into Dr. Klein. Check the county for corrections. I'll see if I can reach a friend at archives. Also, Claire, document everything you receive. Maya's steadiness was a bomb, but it couldn't erase the shape of the problem. I had wanted an ally, a second set of eyes, someone to tell me whether my instincts were right or mad. I had not wanted an audience. I had not wanted my family to be the theater for the unspooling of a secret someone had asked to keep. Watching the family group unfurl, I felt something colder than regret. A secret isn't only the thing kept, it's the engine people use to steer the world. By trying to shine a light on one corner, I had flicked the dimmer switch across the whole house. The question that rose then wasn't whether the letter was true, that I would now have to prove, but who among them would be first to try to bury it again, and how far they would go. I watched the typing indicators in the chat like a weather report, waiting to see which name would be the storm. My phone started pulsing while I was standing at the sink rinsing a wine glass, a small, insistent thing against my hip. I thumbed it out thinking it would be Maya. She'd asked for the scan and I was half expecting another calm, forensic message about next steps, but the lock screen lit with a cascade of notifications from the family group, Whitman fam. I thought of Tom. He'd texted within minutes of the scan. What I didn't expect was the speed at which a private thing would turn public inside our little circle. It began like a whisper. A single message from Tom, "Guys, have you seen this?" And a screenshot attached, the letter laid out on a phone screen, Agnes's slanted, tremulous script unmistakable, the very phrase she'd written to me, "If you find this, we failed you," visible in a snapped moment. The timestamp told me he'd sent it at 7:14. Within seconds came replies, small and incredulous. "Is this real? Claire? What is going on?" The bubbles multiplied. My stomach turned. Rachel's name lit up and I felt the heat of it before I read the words. They were short and sharp, the no-nonsense punctuation I knew. How could you? You can't just do that. This is a family matter. There was something vehicular in the tone, like a door slamming. I remembered the way she'd left the house the night before and the way her anger had gone quiet and predictive. This was the same armor. She followed with an avalanche of texts that took on a frantic, protective cadence. "You're airing everything. Mom will be destroyed. Do you understand what you're doing?" And then, to puncture that, "Are you trying to ruin us?" Helen's message arrived after, surgical and immediate. "Return that letter to me now. Do not put our family through this. You have gone too far." There was a capitalized now, the sort of command she used when she wanted to steer a room. The message folded into a heap of other opinions. Some wept with righteous indignation, some simply demanded proof. Mark sent an emoji, the little half-hearted laugh he used when he didn't know what else to do, a thin, conciliatory sound that did nothing to soften the onslaught. Accusations came next, quick and brutish. "Forgery," someone typed. "Why would you fake this?" Another, "You always wanted attention." A cousin I seldom spoke to wrote, "This is libel," and attached a screenshot of the letter as evidence, as if the exact image would settle everything. Someone else demanded the original be returned within 48 hours. Another said a more ominous tone, "We have to fix this before it blows up." A plan began to assemble itself in typed form, efficient and defensive, calls to certain relatives, a family meeting, a sealed statement. In 100 little ways our private past was being rearranged into contingency. Eleanor's message surprised me. It was short, then longer in the way a careful person becomes when they do not want to be misunderstood. Claire, she wrote, I know. Then quickly, not here. Off group? That softness landed like a small island. I almost tapped back, almost accepted the promise of a solitary conversation. Instead I watched as the rest of the chat flared, swallowed the quiet. Helen's tone became more public, more performative. You knew what Agnes wanted, to keep the family whole. You're betraying that trust. Betrayal, again. The words stuck to me like a label. I tried to imagine Agnes's shaky hand, the way she'd insisted on concealment even as she admitted failure. To me that failure felt like a weight we had the right to set down. To them it was something to bury. I typed nothing. I watched. The chat no longer wanted explanation, it wanted a scapegoat, and the scariest thing was how unanimous they were in making me that person. Screens filled with the same image, repeated and magnified, each new forward a little louder, a little more accusing. A cousin I barely knew messaged privately, if this is true, what does it make us? There was genuine confusion there, not only anger. But then Rachel wrote, this needs to stop. We're meeting Sunday. No drama. No social media. This is our family's business. And under that, a follow-up that felt like an exclusion, Claire, you're not invited. The idea of being exempted from the table, from the narratives my mother could command and the stories I had been allowed to tell at dinner, felt like a physical shove. They were organizing to contain the dust stirred, to smooth our edges back into place without me. In their minds I had become the disturbance, which was both absurd and painfully familiar. They feared scandal, I feared erasure. The two impulses were sometimes the same, in opposite directions. Someone posted a blurred photo of the prayer book, the corner of the page where the letter had been folded, as if proof you could manufacture would be identical to truth. Another person demanded I post provenance of the scan. I thought of the registrar, of the thin paper edge I'd pried out and palmed like contraband. None of my internal evidence mattered here. The group wanted confession or retraction. They wanted the speed of a headline reduced to the finite parameter of a family decision. My phone buzzed with a private message from Maya, calm, practical. You okay? She asked. I wanted to tell her everything, to hand her the messy, painful facts and let her take them apart. I wanted, too, for once to have someone explain the velocity of exposure, how quickly a truth finds oxygen in a crowd of devices and becomes a thing everyone can see and claim to understand. But the chat kept expanding, not in people but in certainty. The certainty was not about what had happened, it was about what they would do to stop it. I watched Helen set a deadline, return the letter by Saturday at noon. We will have answers. Do not force us to escalate. The ultimatum glowed in the dark of my hand. I thought of Agnes's handwriting, of the command to keep us whole, and I felt the shape of two failures, the grandmothers, the families, and the harder choice I had made to pull the stitch. I wanted to respond with a single line that would make them listen, to explain why quiet preservation is sometimes its own violence. I wanted it to be brief and true. Instead I thumbed at the top right corner and hit leave conversation without thinking, because the ring of their voices had become something I couldn't follow. The notification that popped up next was a calendar invite, family lunch, Sunday, 1 p.m. To put this to rest. My name wasn't on the guest list. The chat kept buzzing, but now it felt like it was happening somewhere I could no longer stand. I set the phone down and the room shrank. My mother's demand still sat on the screen, a command to return a paper that had been hidden for years. I sat on the kitchen floor and folded my hands around my knees, feeling the cool wind through my denim. I thought of Agnes's letter again, the words that had felt like confession and instruction at once. The group had chosen its version of safety. I had chosen a different kind of reckoning. I opened my mouth to call Rachel and tell her everything, to ask her how we could possibly choose shame over truth, when the phone buzzed with another message, a single, blunt line, fix this by Sunday. The envelope slid under my door before coffee had a chance to wake me properly, a thick, embossed thing, the kind of stationery people use when they don't want ambiguity about who's speaking. My name was typed on the front. I stood in my kitchen with one slipper on and the other in the wrong room, and I felt oddly calm as if I were watching someone else fumble through a script I'd written for them. Inside, a single sheet on law firm letterhead, neat and unsentimental. Lawrence Black's name at the top, my parents' names in the next line. The first paragraph got straight to business. This firm represents Helen and Mark Whitman, it said. We demand the immediate delivery of the original handwritten letter authored by Agnes Whitman and addressed to Ms. Claire Whitman, currently in your possession. You are to surrender the original within 72 hours of your receipt of this notice. Failure to do so will result in immediate legal action, including but not limited to, an application for injunctive relief, claims for theft and conversion, and pursuit of damages for reputational harm. No florid appeals to family loyalty. No mention of the content. Reputational harm was italicized either by printer choice or by my imagination. The next paragraph was all about preservation, how protecting a family's reputation justified forceful measures, and how the law existed to prevent unauthorized dissemination of material likely to cause scandal and financial loss. He signed his name down at the bottom, like the dismissal of a man who'd handled worse and expected me to fold. There was no way to misread the tone. Detective, blunt, and final. My phone buzzed as if on cue. First a text from an unknown number, "You liar." Another, more inventive one called me a manufactured victim, whatever that meant, and then a message with a photograph of the prayer book from the dinner that showed an edge of yellowed paper peeking out. The photo had been cropped to show only my fingers with the paper. The sender labeled it, "Proof you planted." My stomach folded inward the way it used to when I tried to hide a bruise at 15. But the bruise now wasn't mine alone, it was the family's entire architecture of safety. I thought of Agnes's handwriting, shaky, stubborn, and of her instruction to hide. She had said, "Keep the family whole." This letter had been an attempt to do that. Lawrence's letter wanted me to return it because the family, properly whole, was apparently worth more than whatever truth Agnes had left me. I went to the mailbox expecting more bills. Instead there was a small, folded square of paper, edges soft from someone's careful thumb. When I opened it at my kitchen table the words were printed in a hand that looked like a clenched whisper, "You were told to forget." The imperative landed like a blow. I pictured the last time Agnes had looked at me, not ashamed, not angry, simply tired and resigned. "You were told to forget. Keep the family whole." Agnes had not wanted me to know. Now others were insisting I forget because it suited them. I called Helen because it felt immediate and necessary. She was, in the end, the center of whatever gravity the family still had. The line clicked alive with that small static she always had, an old phone, polished words. She sounded deliberately careful. Short sentences. Each one measured. "Claire," she began. No motherly preamble. "We received notice this morning. Give it back. Now." The world narrowed to her voice, thin with panic she trusted only in clipped syllables. "Lawrence will collect it. It's already been prepared. For everyone's sake." "For everyone's sake?" I echoed, the words tasting like the dinner table after Rachel had stormed out. "Helen, it was hidden. By Grandma. She wanted it hidden." "None of that changes matters now," she said. "You hand it over. We will protect you, Claire. We will make sure nothing," a clipped silence, then, "nothing goes further." "Protect me how?" I asked. "By silencing me? By threatening me with courtrooms and strangers in my mailbox?" "We're protecting the family's reputation," she said. The phrase came out as if it were a surgical instrument. "People will not understand otherwise. Lawrence will handle it." There it was, the fulcrum. Reputation had a market value in this house. It paid for comfort and quiet, it bought discretion. It also came with lawyers who could wield words into weapons and a family who preferred to risk legal bills over messy truths. After I hung up the messages accelerated. An anonymous email threatening to publish all unflattering particulars, if I didn't stop. A voicemail clipped to 30 seconds of static and the promise that truth has consequences. They were less creative than the family fights, thin, professional intimidation. The tenor was clear: give the thing back, or have the machinery of law and rumor grind you. I walked the apartment, the paper weight of the letter in my hand, and thought about what was at stake beyond one folded sheet of paper. Money, someone would pay for lawyers, and that bill would be framed as defense of honor. Identity, the idea that the person I was could be negotiated away if the right signatures appeared on the right forms. Public image, the Whitman name, scrubbed and polished, offered to the world as a brand to be defended. I thought, too, about Maya and the risks I'd taken when I scanned a copy and sent it to her. About Tom's impulsive screenshots and the way something private had migrated like ink through wet paper into a wider field. Once it was out, control became performance. Who would say what, who would be believed, and at what cost? There is a practical part of me that understands how these things work: evidence, pleadings, motions. And a stubborn, emotional part of me that Agnes had spoken to when she tucked words in that paper crevice. She had failed us in one way and tried to keep the rest whole. Now the law had arrived to finish the job. I refolded the yellowed letter into the envelope the way you'd fold a wood splinter out of skin. On the kitchen table the Lawrence black letter waited like an accusation. Outside a truck idled at the curb, a sound that made the apartment tremble. The 72-hour clock began to tick as soon as I set the paper down. The choice was no longer purely moral: return it and let them stitch the story into a neat bandage, or hold on and invite the law and the press and whatever claws they keep in courtrooms. There was no decent middle ground anymore. I sat down, the paper in my lap, and for the first time since I found Agnes's note I thought about consequences I had never imagined paying. 72 hours. Refusing to be branded a forger felt like a small, stubborn thing, and then like the only thing that mattered. Words on a yellowed page were one thing, a lab certificate was another. I ordered a discreet parentage test through a company a friend recommended, the kind that sends a saliva kit in a plain envelope and emails results under a code. Maya helped, not in person, but with logistics and an address where the parcel wouldn't rouse suspicion. I used cash at a clinic under the pretense of routine blood work and handed over my sample like I was mailing a letter. While I waited, which felt like a different kind of time, elastic and slow, I went back to the hospital records I'd been noodling over. The registrar had been standoffish the first time. This time I sat in a public reading room and copied pages with cold fingers. There were more of the faint, bureaucratic ellipses I'd seen before, a birth log with a name scratched through, an incorrection stamped amended, and a late addendum that made no sense unless someone had been moving pieces after a game had begun. A staff roster had a column of handwriting that looked like it had been done quickly, at odd hours. A few entries were blacked out so heavily you could see the shadow of what had been there but not the letters themselves. I felt like a vandal picking at old paint until a hollow revealed something that should have been fixed from the start. Somewhere between the registry and the clinic I found Ruth Keller. I had found her because a phone directory and a law clerk with more conscience than sense pointed me toward a nursing association list. She lived 3 towns over, and when I first saw her she was smaller than I expected, a woman made of napkins and apology. Her hands trembled when she shook mine, and the skin at her knuckles had the mottled look of someone who had been cold too often. We met in the hospital chapel because it was the only neutral place she could think of that wouldn't trigger someone else's fear. She sat and folded her hands like a child waiting to be scolded. "I've been waiting," she said, voice like paper. "I didn't think it would ever be you." I told her about Agnes's letter, about the scratched names and the way the registrar had a habit of looking off when I asked questions. I told her about being called a forger and about Lawrence's letter and the anonymous notes. I left out nothing and then I left out too much, the parts one didn't want to believe. Ruth closed her eyes and exhaled as if the breath had been keeping something back. Her memory was smaller than I'd hoped, patchy in places, but the pieces she gave me fit like a puzzle I already suspected. "There were 2 infants," she said. 2 set down at once. One wasn't like the other when they put her in the bassinet. I told them. I told Dr. Hargreaves. He told me to mind my work. Later that night, it was in the corridor, near the supply closet, he and the head of admissions spoke in hushed voices. They made us all understand what would happen if word got out. Loss of position, of pension, of license. The word was scandal. You don't understand what scandal did to small hospitals back then. They'd have lost funding. We'd have been blamed. It was ugly. She looked at me and the convening of time, that long night, sat on her like a shawl. "There was a deal," she said. Words like transfer and corrected paperwork. "We were told to file, not to speak." Agnes, she came that week. She signed a paper. Her hand shook. Her fingers traced the air where a signature might have been. I told myself I was keeping the family whole. Her face was an apology too big for the space it occupied. "Sorry," she said, again and again, the word more like a hinge than a sentence. I left Ruth with her confession and the sound of her voice in my ears, already building into something more real. I went home and tried not to imagine Helen's face when the truth landed on whatever it was she protected. I pressed my palm against the paper I'd tucked into my blazer since the prayer book at dinner and wondered if Agnes had felt what Ruth conveyed now, that keeping people together can sometimes mean keeping a wound open. The lab email came at 3 in the morning. I saw it through the dark, hands clumsy with the phone, and read the technical language that felt like a sentence and then a verdict. The report said, plainly and without malice, that the probability of maternity between me and the Whitman family as they were listed was effectively 0. The phrasing was clinical. I could have thrown it out the window and the truth inside it would have remained the same. I texted Maya one word, "It's true." Within the hour my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the other end was thick with the kind of crying you can't anesthetize with time. "I always suspected," Eleanor said, and the sentence made my knees go warm. She had been the quiet one at family gatherings, the cousin who sat in the corner and watched the domestic weather change. "Not because of anything dramatic," she said, wiping her face. "Because small things didn't line up for me. Photos, remarks, the way your mother flinched when you asked certain questions. I thought maybe I was wrong. I thought maybe I was making ghosts." She laughed then, a little barked sob. "I can't do much from here. I'm old and afraid. But I can believe you. I can be there if you need me." I wanted to tell her about Ruth, about the corridor, about the registrar's redactions and the pale, determined letter that had led me back to this. I wanted to tell her how alone it had felt to have my own family call me a liar. Instead I said, "Thank you," which was everything and not enough. By morning the rest of the house had already tightened. Helen called in the afternoon and spoke of reputation like a taut rope. Rachel accused me of inventing science to wound them. Mark used humor as a shield and flinched when I put the lab printout on the kitchen table. Eleanor's message sat in my phone like a warm coin. Someone finally believed me, however afraid and shaky she was. Proof existed now in a clean, impersonal font, and that felt both liberating and terrible. It was one thing to hold a letter and another to hold a paper that could not be dismissed as handwriting. I folded the lab report slowly and slid it into the drawer where Agnes's letter lived. The drawer made a small, final sound as it closed. Outside, the house continued to breathe its habitual lies. Inside, in the dim kitchen, I felt the first honest ache of forward motion. Tomorrow I would have to choose where to put both documents, on the table in front of Helen, or into a sealed envelope to a lawyer who had already told me I had 72 hours. I sat with the decision like someone holding a lit match. The match flared. The question was what I was willing to burn with it. I told myself for days that there was still time, windowed, delayed, negotiable. Lawrence's letter sat on my kitchen table like a second, more formal will, hand-delivered, polite, precise, the kind of language that tries to make a threat sound like a favor. Take the letter back. Stop this. Think of the family. Helen's voice in my head, Mark's laugh, Rachel's glare. The registrar's hedging, the registrars we had to correct it, the flimsy paper trail that refused to bend toward me without a courtroom, all of it was a countdown. I didn't want the legal machinery to write the story for us. I didn't want a law firm's press release to be how the world learned that a small, private deception had shaped 3 lives. The part that finally tipped me was imagining some lawyer laundering the mess into a narrative pieta for the Whitman name, with our pain neatly framed as an unfortunate, resolved incident. Agnes had told me to keep the family whole. But Agnes had also written, shaking and sure, if you find this, we failed you. The pronoun felt like an accusation against the silence itself, not just the people who kept it. So I stayed up late and wrote. I opened a fresh document and typed slowly, like I was knocking a hole through something thick. I described the small things plainly, the edge of paper beneath a prayer book, the yellowed fold with my name on it, the line about failure, and I attached scans. I redacted names I couldn't prove with a black rectangle and left the rest raw. I wrote that I had sought legal guidance, that I had tried to get records the right way and had been stonewalled. I included Ruth Keller's sworn account, that a nurse had confessed to a hush, that there had been a switch and a settlement of silence. I wrote about the registrar's corrected entry, the scratched-out name, the added initial that didn't match my parents' handwriting in any archive. It seemed, in the quiet of that room, like the only honest way to begin. I published in 2 places. First, an anonymous thread on a forum I'd lurked on for years, a place where confessions and scandals bloomed and wilted within hours. Second, a private blog I set up under a handle nobody would connect to me, with password access for people I trusted enough to give it. First, Eleanor, a couple of cousins. I hit post with my hands cold and shaking. For a minute, nothing happened. Then my phone buzzed, and the world rearranged itself around the noise. Tom did not need encouragement. He had already been forwarding screenshots from my earlier scan to cousins. Within an hour he was calling to tell me the thread had been seen 100 times, then 1,000. Someone from the anonymous forum had copied the post to a local Facebook group, then to a neighborhood chat. A reporter I'd never met sent a direct message asking if I would speak on the record. Maya texted, I'm on a train but I'm reading. Call me. She called anyway, voice low and steady. Eleanor sent a single line, I always thought something like this might be true. I'm here. It felt like a stone dropped into a still pond. Ripples lapped at everything. Strangers wrote to me, some kind, some vicious. A woman said she had been switched as a baby too and thanked me for making it visible. A man accused me of fabricating a family drama for attention. Comments piled up under the shared screenshot. People in my town debated the ethics of exposing family secrets online. Threads spun out of control with their own momentum. The registrar's office, which had been politely evasive in person, closed ranks in public statements about privacy and legal procedure. Lawrence's office sent another email, more pointed than the first, warning of defamation suits and reputational damage. An anonymous account left a voicemail on my phone that was a single syllable, forget. And then my parents' faces were not just ours anymore. They became pictures on neighbors' phones, faces turned into subjects of speculation. Someone had filmed Mark at the hardware store, his hands in his pockets, a forced grin that made his eyes small with something like panic. Helen's voice, usually a low canal that steered conversation away from the dangerous stuff, was caught asking Lawrence on the phone what to tell the church. The footage came with captions and assumptions and the black and white hunger of social feeds. People who had once waved politely now raised their eyebrows in the supermarket aisle. Inside the house, the reactions sharpened and aimed themselves at me with a precision that felt like the room had been rearranged by accusation. Rachel's fury was a live thing. She stood with her arms folded and said, "You had to make us look like criminals, Claire. You had to make them talk about us." Her voice was so small I could hear it vibrate. Helen's hands trembled when she set her tea down. She spoke in clipped sentences about community, about the family's right to privacy, about lawyers and scorn. Mark tried to laugh it off and then laughed too much, the sound coming out like a rebuke. "Why would you do this?" He kept repeating, as if I had taken something from him in a way that couldn't be returned. There were quieter things too. Eleanor, in a voicemail I played 5 times before admitting it out loud, said, "I always suspected. I'm sorry I didn't say more." Ruth's name started appearing in comments as corroboration. Her voice had weight, even frail, and it pulled more attention than my paper and pixels ever did. Reporters called, neighbors whispered, and people I'd thought cared less than they did texted questions I couldn't answer without sounding like I was building a case. There was a moment, after the 3rd legal email and the first anonymous threat, when I thought, very briefly, that I had been selfish. That my need for truth had trampled the delicate scaffolding of a family that, for better or worse, had kept itself together with secrets. Then I remembered Agnes's handwriting, the quaking clarity, "Keep the family whole." And the other line, the one that caught like a burr, "If you find this, we failed you." The sentence was not only about them. It was about me. I had expected some version of this: anger, legal maneuvers, the slow retracting of invitations. I had not expected how quickly the town would want an answer, or how suddenly answers would require me to point and stand still under the gaze. I had not expected to feel so exposed, or to feel, at the same time, so unburdened. That night, the thread had been picked up by a local blog that used our family name in the headline. My phone would not stop lighting up. I shut it off and put the device face down on the counter, like I was trying to contain a small animal under a bowl. But screens do not hold what has been posted. Words already lived elsewhere. I had made a choice. I had pushed the truth into the current because I wanted it to run somewhere people could see it, not be smoothed away by a polished statement. The first wave had landed, and under its weight the house shifted. I sat at the kitchen table, the scanned letter a pale rectangle among empty mugs, and I understood that there would be no putting the paper back in the envelope, not for any of us. There would only be questions, and the furious, complicated, and very public answers. They stopped paying for the piano lessons first. It felt like a cheap cut, the sort you make when you want to punish someone without seeming cruel. A note on the kitchen counter, unsigned, that our mother's generosity was under review. Then the automatic withdrawals from the joint account failed. My card was declined at the grocery store. The woman behind me in line frowned as if I ought to be embarrassed. Helen called once, voice clipped, and Mark laughed too loudly in the background as if he could make it all a joke. We were careful to keep the script of civility until we no longer needed to. Cutting me off meant the rest of the world had permission. The invitations stopped arriving. Weddings, birthdays, funerals, things that used to arrive in the mail with nervous, flowered note cards now skipped my name. I learned to check the family group chat out of habit. The group had gone from a cheerful collage of memes and casseroles to a serrated thing I needed to avoid. Screenshots of my blog post circulated with captions: "Attention seeker, liar, fabricator." Private messages were worse. There were calm ones, a cousin who called to say she couldn't read the words yet, another who sent a trembling, "I don't know what to believe," and there were messages that felt like nails: "You destroyed our family, return the letter or we'll see you in court, how dare you." Lawrence's firm sent another blunt letter. Anonymous notes appeared in my mailbox, blank except for the words, "Leave it be." I lost the comfortable, mechanical role I had worn all my life, the good daughter who arrived early to help clear plates, who never raised her voice, who smoothed a conversation like an iron. That uniform had insulated me from hard choices. Stripped of it, I was suddenly visible in unflattering light. Not a helper but an agitator, not a pacifier but a threat. And yet there was something tremulous and small that grew at the edge of that loss. I kept the original letter in a small metal box I had bought on an impulse the night I found it. It was ridiculous and entirely practical, a cheap lock, a felt lining, hidden away in the back of my closet. When I opened it the paper smelled like the linen handkerchiefs Agnes used to tuck into her purse. Her handwriting was as I remembered, unsteady, every essay little jab. The first line read, "If you find this, we failed you." I turned the paper over and read it until the words blurred. Holding the physical object felt like holding a lungful of cold air after being underwater. People who had been trained into silence began to speak in ways that were careful and private. Maya kept her distance in public. She was out of town for work, and her timeline was a steady presence of mundane photos. But her messages arrived at 3 in the morning. I read everything. "I believe you. If you want, I'm coming down." That was the kind of loyalty that didn't need to be announced on Facebook. Eleanor, always quiet at family events, sent a message I almost deleted by reflex because I didn't trust kindness from within the family. It read, "You were right." The letter forced me to see what I didn't want to see. "I'm sorry." She called the next day from a payphone outside her apartment because she said she couldn't risk being overheard. Listening to her voice tremble, I felt something inside me uncoil. There were others, too. A note tucked under my door from an aunt who signed it with a name I hadn't heard in years. A voicemail from a nephew who said he had been too young to know but had kept his doubts to himself. These confessions weren't loud or heroic. They were the furtive, ashamed sort of admissions people make when a taboo cracks. There was Ruth, of course, whose hands had trembled and who had finally agreed to tell me what she had seen. Her voice was small but steady on the phone. I kept my mouth shut because Agnes asked, she said, and because I couldn't do anything else. But I wish I had told you sooner. It wasn't the same as forgiveness, but it was proof that the silence had not been unanimous. Mostly, the admissions made me reconsider the nature of the secrecy. I had believed for a long time that keeping quiet was motivated by protection, that my family had wrapped themselves around the truth to spare a child pain. The more people who slid into my inbox to murmur that the letter had wrecked their sleep, the more I began to see another shape: self-preservation. The town was a network of favors and reputations. To admit a wrongdoing at the hospital, to acknowledge Agnes's role in a deception, was to admit complicity, and complicity costs people their standing. A registrar who hinted at a correction that fixed the records could lose her job. A doctor who signed the paperwork could lose his license. A family that admitted a switch could lose everything they had curated: a business, a social chair, the mantelpiece plaque. The silence smoothed their future at the expense of my right to know. Sitting on the kitchen floor with the box in my lap, I thought of Helen's face the last time she had looked at me, resolute, not unkind, but narrowed into an insistence that the family be kept intact. I understood then that Agnes's command, keep the family whole, had been less about me than about maintaining a structure that protected them. That didn't make the choice right. The small rewards of truth were not celebratory. They were private condolences, the creak of a door opening where there had only been a wall. When Eleanor came to the building 2 days later, I went down without makeup, my palms cold on the rail. She stood there for a long time in the hallway, hands stuffed into her coat. She looked smaller than she did in family photographs, like someone who had been crouching for years and was now trying to stand. I can't go back, she said before I could ask what she wanted. Not like this. Not with what I know. Her words didn't heal the cuts. Being cut off still meant missed payments and awkward supermarket runs and the echo of Helen's last, furious text, "You made your bed." But the admissions that came afterwards, slow, halting, sometimes ashamed, were a different kind of tide. They told me I hadn't been wrong to take the letter out of its place under the prayer book. They told me that secrecy had been chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with me. Tomorrow, Eleanor wanted to bring something from the attic. She said it might help to have more of the story in my hands. I closed the box, slipped the key into my pocket, and let the apartment settle around me. I had given up the quiet comfort of being the daughter they liked. I had not given up the truth. And there was a thin, urgent relief in that, like a door half open after a long night. Months later, the edges haven't smoothed. If anything, they're sharper because we've kept looking at them. Apologies arrive like holiday cards, late, polite, with qualifiers in the margin. Face-to-face meetings are short, like rehearsed scenes. Chairs are pushed back before dessert. Someone always has to leave early for a meeting, or needs to step outside for air. My parents move between pleading and condemnation with a restless, almost mechanical rhythm. 1 minute my mother is putting on a voice that tries to be small and conciliatory, the next she is angry as if I had personally stolen every safe thing from under her bed. My father laughs too loud at nothing to fill the gaps. They both pivot away from responsibility almost as soon as it becomes theirs to hold. Family history feels like a set of glass ornaments we are each holding at arm's length, inspecting for cracks. You learn a lot about people by watching how they treat the thing that breaks them. Rachel moved out of the shared house the week after the court filing. She texts when she can't avoid it, short messages that read like sealed envelopes. "Don't make this worse. You're destroying us. You always had to be the brave one." Brave, she meant like it was my role and not a consequence of a choice. Eleanor slipped me a note at a cousin's wedding, one sentence: "I'm sorry you had to find out from the internet." Her eyes were wet, and hers was one of the few hands that didn't clasp fully in anger. She has been quietly crossing the room toward me, then stopping a steady 2 feet away so someone else can see she's being reasonable. Tom is somewhere between fury and awe, guilty for how quickly his screenshotting amplified everything and embarrassed by how his curiosity cost so much. Other relatives burned bridges with a ceremony I didn't make them perform, invitations were not sent, old friendships quietly ceased to exist. A handful have come back, cautiously, after months of conversations with their spouses, their priests, their own mentors. They bring casseroles that cool on the counter and apologies that are flinching and imperfect. Some of them say, in their softened voices, that nobody deserved to be lied to. Others say, more carefully, that families sometimes do terrible things to preserve each other, and I ought to understand the calculus. There have been small kindnesses that are sharp in their own way. Maya drove into town once and sat on my floor while I read through Agnes's letter aloud, both of us laughing and then quietly crying as we parsed handwriting that had once told us to keep the family whole. Ruth came to my kitchen with a thermos of tea and an apology that was thinner than I would have liked, but honest. She remembered the hush, she remembered being afraid. Her memory bolstered the facts. It also reminded me that fear and cowardice live in the same house as guilt. Lawrence Black continues to lurk in our lives like a professional undertow. His letters are bureaucratic and cold, but people read them and feel shame on someone else's behalf. What I have gained is not nothing. Truth has a clarity that comforts in a way embarrassment cannot. It has connected me with a few new relations. The woman who now knows that she is my biological sister called once, her voice shaking but bright with another kind of relief. There is space now to demand things previously unnameable, recognition, correction of records, explanations that don't end with, "we thought it best." I sleep sometimes because I do not have to imagine an entire history that is not mine. I am, more often than not, tonally calmer when people ask me who I am. That is not nothing. What I have lost keeps tally with those gains. Rachel's trust is not the same. We sit across from one another and measure our sentences to avoid detonations. My mother's favor, the warm center of the family, has calcified into a conditional kindness that looks at me sideways and asks whether I can be more discreet. Invitations stopped coming for holidays I had planned my entire life around. Once certain relationships turned tentative and then thin. People who once thought of me as their anchor now treat me as a threat. I am lonely in a new way, surrounded by the physical things of family and yet excluded from the shared narrative that made them ours. Then there was the voicemail. I hadn't expected my mother to call. She usually left texts full of etiquette. This one was different, a single message, recorded twice, as if she'd rehearsed it between breaths. Her voice was smaller than it used to be. "If you could change anything," she said, and then swallowed audibly. "Would you change it, Claire?" It was an odd, clinical question, almost ethical in the way a judge might phrase it. I listened once, twice, 3 times in the living room where the light slanted across the carpet. There was no pleading in it exactly, or maybe there was, but it was tamed by propriety. The years of being the good daughter made me want to answer in a way that would right everything, but the truth is not a thing I can unhear. It does not become less true because other people find it convenient to forget. Agnes had written in that shaky, careful hand, "If you find this, we failed you. Keep the family whole." Her injunction has been a compass and an accusation. Following it would have meant living on a lie I was no longer able to live with. Not following it has meant a loneliness I had not fully imagined. I have replayed that message like a small, private litany. Would I change it? Part of me wants to. I imagine a wave of relief sweeping through the house if I signed the letter over to shame and took back all the public records, if I taught everyone to forget and let them have their tidy amends. Another part of me knows that the truth, once seen, becomes a shape you cannot press flat again without tearing it. There are consequences you cannot wrap in apologies, so I have to live with both. I have to live with the knowledge that truth cost me things I loved, and with the knowledge that lying would have cost someone else the rest of their life. The scale is not neat. The trade is ugly and private. The moral clarity I expected hasn't arrived with a fanfare. It arrives in small, daily decisions about whether to accept invitations, whether to pick up my father's calls, whether to reply to my sister in love or in argument. I have not returned my mother's call. I press play on the message again, trying to find the answer inside the spaces between her words. The question she asked sits like a stone in my mouth, and I am still learning whether to spit it out or swallow.